a truckload to a company on the far west coast, coming from the east coast. The route across the country is one I've taken many times before, being a truck driver for almost 20 years. It's always the same every time I make one of these drives. Same roads, same truck stops, and same everything. Over these 20 years though, I've never really had anything crazy happen. I've had a few odd scenarios, but they'd never amounted to anything. So when I was driving this route again, I had no worries in my mind. It was just another day on the job. About 20 hours into the route, a storm started coming over and slowing down my driving. It was late too, so by then I was already looking for the next truck stop to sleep at. As I drove though, a very sudden light appeared behind me. The road I was on was flat and straight, so I would have seen them coming in my mirror, but it was all of a sudden that they were right behind me. Maybe they had just turned on their lights or something. I didn't know, but they very quickly came right up to the back. I kept my eyes on them until they got so close that they were completely covered by the trailer. All I could see were their headlights reflecting off the back. But then their lights shut off. I maintained my speed and kept looking back at my mirrors, trying to see if they were still behind me, but I had no way to know. For someone to turn off their lights in the middle of a heavy storm was insane though, and to be tailing behind me so close was just as insane. Thankfully, the sign showed a truck stop was only 5 miles ahead, so at least I knew I was close to getting away from whatever this was. I didn't want to jump to conclusions based on just some weird behavior, but as a trucker, it's hard not to think about the possibility of it being an attempted robbery, especially when alone on the road at night. For the rest of the 5 miles, I saw no signs of them behind me. I was still on edge because I couldn't really see anything anyway, but I started feeling less worried as I was coming in on the truck stop. I pulled in, trying to check my mirrors to see if they followed, but with the rain and lack of lighting, it was really too hard to tell. The truck stop was mostly empty though, aside from a few trucks at the gas pumps. I pulled off to the side and parked in the middle of the lot. After waiting a minute and getting some of my stuff organized, I opened the truck door and leaned my head out, looking along the side of the trailer. I was drenched from the rain in just a matter of seconds, but from what I could tell, there was no car behind me. I closed the door and finally felt a bit of relief, grabbing my pillow and blanket from the passenger side. I locked the doors, turned off the truck, and tried to get some shut-eye. The rain pounding on the metal roof made it easy to fall asleep, blocking out any possible sounds coming from other trucks pulling in and out. When I woke up though, I felt I had only been asleep for a few minutes. I looked around, seeing it was still dark out and the storm was the same, if not worse. But before I could check my mirrors, a loud thump shook the truck. My eyes opened wider. I reached for the door handle and opened it, looking out at the back of the trailer. Through the rain, I could barely see the outline of a car with its headlights off, then 2 men moving around in front of it. Terrified, I hesitated to step out and confront them. And as I sat there in that moment of hesitation, the door suddenly slammed against my body, shoving me back further into the driver's seat. Another man stood outside, yelling at me to stay where I was, then slamming the door again. His right hand was shoved in his hoodie, and with 2 other men behind the truck, I was in no position to try anything. I could feel the truck shake as I just sat in place with the guy outside my door watching my every move. He didn't even look away for a second. This went on for a few minutes, then they ran back to their car and drove off. I was still in shock, watching their car disappear onto the road. I called the police and put in a report, but no information ever came up on who the men were. All I know is that if I had been any less aware and had just tried to drive off at first sight of the men, I probably wouldn't have been able to make it out as safely as I did. It was a typical Friday after my college classes were out, and I was spending the night doing DoorDash. This was my regular routine, dashing on the weekends to help me pay for all my living expenses while on campus. The night started well, getting a lot of orders done and making a good amount. And then it hit a stalemate after the big dinner rush. Very few orders were showing up, and the ones that did, they were very low paying, basically waste of time orders. But then after an hour of aimlessly driving around, an order came through that wasn't too bad. It was 8 miles away, but the payment was well worth it. It was nothing absurd, but enough to make it not a ripoff like a lot of the other ones were. I accepted the order and ran into the restaurant to grab the bag, then hopped in my car and started driving. The map said it would take 30 minutes. Which I think was the longest of any orders I'd done up until this point. Most of the houses were right around campus, because any further than 15 to 20 minutes out, it becomes pretty much just bare fields of grass. As I got to that 20-minute mark, it became just that. Very few houses, mostly sitting far out in fields of crops, and nothing else. The rest of the 10-minute drive was on this empty road, going along these farms. Then I made it to the house. There was a dirt driveway connecting to the road, leading through a large field, and in the far back was a small house. Driving through the field felt very eerie. Even though I'm not one to get nervous without reason, this felt different. As I got further out from the road, the only sound was the low rumbling of my car on the dirt. I parked out front and got the bag ready, then left the car on as I stepped out. The night was quiet and the house was dark, having only the porch light on to illuminate the outside. I walked through the unkempt grass and up to the porch, knocking on the door. As I waited, I looked back at my car, sitting in the dark, with the field of pitch black behind it. A moment went by, then I knocked again, but there was no response, not even the sound of anyone inside. It didn't take long for me to realize the strangeness of the situation, seeing no lights on in the windows, and noticing how decayed the house looked up close. The only thing that made me think it couldn't be abandoned was that I had an order for this address, and the porch light was on. I looked at the light, thinking, why would that be the only light? But by some odd chance, I happened to recognize the top portion of the casing having a cheap solar battery. It was just an automatic light that charges during the day and turns on in the evening, meaning nobody had to be here to turn it on. Just as I was piecing this all together though, I heard a rumbling sound behind me. I turned, seeing a car driving down the dirt path and coming up right behind my car. I stood there and stared at their headlights until a man stepped out. I yelled from the porch, asking if this was his order, but he didn't reply. He just stood right next to his car and didn't move or speak. I felt my adrenaline spike as I began realizing how horrible the situation likely was. The silence of the night only reminded me that there was nobody here to help. I was stuck in the middle of a field between an empty house and a stranger. In a split-second instinctual reaction, I dropped the bag and sprinted off the porch, running behind the house and straight into the field of grass. I looked back, seeing the man coming up behind me. Frantically, I continued running, and the further out I got, the thicker and taller the grass became, until it was covering all views of direction. By then, I knew the guy had no chance in following me. I slowed down, catching my breath as I carefully moved through the crops and tried to be quiet in case the man was still trying to find me. Eventually, I made it to someone else's yard, and from there I got to a road where I had enough signal to call for help. Police picked me up and went to check on my car, but of course, the man was gone by then. I was surprised though, because my car hadn't been looted, and the bag of food was still on the porch of the abandoned house. But that could only mean that the man had other intentions, likely far worse than just robbing me. This happened when I was 18, making the road trip from my hometown to my new college. I had all my stuff shoved into the trunk and backseat of my cheap SUV. This was not only my first long road trip alone, but was also going to be my first time being away from my family for an extended amount of time, so my nerves were reasonably high. Anyway, the directions I was taking said it was 600 miles total, which I split into 2 days of driving. I was taking whatever route the maps had me take, and it estimated I'd make it to the hotel at 11 p.m. But with possible traffic, gas stops, and getting food, I knew I'd likely get there much later. By 7, the sun was fully gone, and most of the cars were gone too. Every once in a while a car would pass by, and I'd see their headlights slowly fade out in front of me, but for most of the drive, it was just me. This actually made me really tired and bored. Around 10, I decided I'd stop at the next gas station before making the final stretch of the drive. About 10 minutes later, I exited the road and entered a gas station. Being so far out, this wasn't a town or anything. It was literally just a gas station with a few pumps and a tiny convenience store. I didn't see any other cars on the road or in the lot, and not even any lights from any nearby houses or buildings in the distance. I pulled right up to a pump and got out to start topping off my tank, and as I looked around, I almost got jump scared by a guy walking up to me. In comparison to myself, he was much older, probably 50s if I had to guess, and he honestly looked homeless. But regardless, being approached out here wasn't something I was expecting, and his short smile didn't make me feel any more comfortable. "Hi, do you need something?" I said, hoping he wouldn't walk any closer. The man stopped a few feet from my car and looked around almost cautiously before responding. "Take the exit back onto the highway." I looked at him confused, not sure if I was understanding him right. He pointed behind me at the exit I came from and repeated himself. "Take the exit back onto the highway." After a second, I said okay, and the man walked off, but I was still really confused. The exit I came from that he wanted me to take again was a one-way road, so by his logic, he wanted me to drive on the wrong side of the road and do a U-turn back onto the highway. It just didn't make any sense. I looked out at the entrance road, the obvious one that I was supposed to take, and there were no signs of any construction or anything blocking it. It just looked like an empty ramp back onto the highway. As I put the pump back and got in my car, I glanced over at the man, who was now just sitting against the side of the convenience store. The more I thought about it though, the more crazy that man seemed just to be sitting out here saying nonsense. I thought maybe this was some kind of trap or something, so I went with my instinct and drove out of the lot and toward the entrance to the highway. As I merged onto it though, I realized pretty much all the streetlights were out. I slowed down, thinking maybe this was a construction zone or something. I kept my eyes focused on the road directly ahead, making sure to be cautious of anything. But while I made my way through the unlit road, I saw only a brief outline of a figure to my left before a pickup truck came out of nowhere and stopped right in front of my car. Every door opened as 4 men jumped out of the truck and started running up to my car, holding weapons of all kinds. Metal bats, machetes, knives, and not even anything covering their faces. They just had this emotionless gaze, like they felt nothing of what they were doing. I quickly started backing up as they got just a few feet away from my windows. And once I got far enough back, I suddenly saw the outline of dozens of people coming out of the shadows off the side of the road. A few even tried chasing my car as I frantically reversed out of there. As soon as I could, I turned around and sped off. I called 911 once I felt I was safe, but for some reason, I never got a call back. No update on it at all, almost like they didn't even check on it. Ironically though, it was the creepy old guy at the gas station that tried to prevent me from even getting caught up in that mess. Or at least that was what I assume he was doing. Either way, I was incredibly lucky to get out of that with my life, as I have no idea what that was or what they were all planning to do. This was only a few months ago. I was spending the weekend cozying up inside, as it was the end of winter, and these were the last few days of cold before it was supposed to start heating up. This night, it was rainy and cold, so I had nothing better to do than watch some movies and relax. But it was sometime not too long after dinner that there was a knock at the door. I got up and walked over, but looking out the peephole, I didn't recognize the man. He was wearing some brown jacket and a beanie, and he was holding a snow shovel. Seeing as there wasn't any snow on the ground, I didn't understand what he was here for. I cracked the door just an inch and asked what he wanted. It took all but 5 seconds of listening to him to know he was up to no good. He stumbled over his words and was trying to tell me a whole story about how he was just a friendly guy looking for any jobs to do in my yard. Something felt off about it and unnatural, so I said no thanks and started shutting the door, but the guy quickly put his hand on it. For a second, he just stared at me, keeping the door open, before he let go. I shut and locked it, and after processing what happened, I looked back out the window. He walked down to the sidewalk and disappeared in the rainy fog. I watched for another minute to make sure he'd actually left for good. Then I went back to my movie. The guy was definitely sketchy, but I didn't think he would come back or anything. It would probably just go on to the next house. The rain had picked up over the next hour. I was still in the living room and had started another movie, although I knew I was probably too tired to finish it. My eyes were drifting in and out, but randomly, there was a thump above me that shook me awake. It was just one thump and was kind of hard to tell how loud it actually was with the rain outside. But what was odd about it was that it was definitely from above me. I got up and walked upstairs, looking for anything fallen over, or even a leak in the ceiling that might have made the house settle a bit. However, I found nothing. It could have been one of the gutters clicking out of place from the heavy rain, or really anything else, so I ignored it. I went back downstairs, and being more awake now, I decided to finish the rest of the movie. By the time I'd finished it and was ready to go to bed, it was nearly 12 a.m. I shut off the TV and went around turning off all the lights downstairs. But as I was walking upstairs to go to bed, I could very quickly feel the temperature drop as I got closer to the top of the steps. Maybe I was too tired to give it much thought, but when I got upstairs and started closing each of the doors that I'd opened earlier, I noticed something from the corner of one of the rooms. The window was cracked open. I must have stared at it for a whole 10 seconds, thinking how impossible that was and just being extremely confused. I walked over and looked at it closer. It was one of the windows that had a small roof overhang under it, and before I closed it, I barely could see an imprint on the window seal of what looked like a shoe. I could feel the blood rush from my face as I turned around and just listened for a moment. The low creaking of the house, combined with the rain speckling the roof, only made me more unnerved, knowing someone was in my house right now. I began slowly walking, as quietly as I could, back into the hallway. All the other doors were still open, making me feel like someone's eyes could be watching me right now through one of the doorways. I was able to make it downstairs though, and from there I got my phone and hid in the garage, calling 911. It took 5 minutes for the first officer to arrive. I heard nothing but the rain during that time. Once I let the officer in, I waited on my porch as he searched the home. About 2 minutes later, I heard him call out upstairs, and then he came down, holding a guy in handcuffs. I quickly recognized him as the man who showed up on my doorstep earlier in the night. Then he had a terrible look of anger as he passed by me and was thrown in the car. Putting all the pieces together, the guy had climbed up onto my roof, which was likely the cause of the thump I heard hours ago. Then he got in through the second-story window, which I never had thought to even lock. Most disturbing, though, is that the officer said he was hiding in the master bedroom, which I was literally 30 seconds from entering and maybe even falling asleep without any idea he was in there. The guy even took his shoes off after climbing in the window to not let his shoe prints show on the carpet. So the fact that I saw the tiny imprint on the window seal is a miracle. With him going directly to my bedroom, his intentions were clearly malicious, and thankfully the judge agreed. It's only been a few months since, but I still have sleepless nights where I can't help but feel like someone is hiding inside my home in the middle of the night. Oh. A couple years ago, I applied for a temporary job at a local gas station. I was planning to move in 6 months, so I couldn't get anything too permanent, but I still needed to make some cash beforehand. This job paid well, enough to convince me to work the job opening they had for the overnight shift. I would just stay by the register and occasionally do regular maintenance work. This was during my 4th month working there. At some point during this time, I became familiar with a customer that came in pretty frequently. Almost every night, around 1 or 2 a.m., this guy would walk in and buy random different things. Sometimes it was household items, or food, or tools. I always thought it was weird, because he'd come in every night to buy a couple things that would be way cheaper and easier to get at any regular grocery store. He didn't talk much either. All I knew was that his name was Dave, and he drove an old red Chevy sedan. He looked like he was maybe 40 to 45 years old. Anyway, one night at the usual 1 a.m. time, Dave pulled into the gas station. No other customers were here. It was just me sitting in the corner waiting out the time. When Dave walked in though, there was something different about him. He was dripping in sweat, and he was rushing through the aisles, searching for something specific. When he finally found what he was looking for, he hurried up to the counter and tossed it down for me to ring up. It was a master lock, like one for locking up a bicycle. I really didn't feel like it was appropriate for me to question him, but with the guy sweating and being in a rush, I just felt a little off about this. "It's good to see you again, Dave. You just get a new bike?" I asked in a friendly manner, hoping it would come off as just casual conversation. He didn't even look at me. Instead, he fumbled around for his wallet and started yanking out cash in a hurry. I left it at that and just rang him up, then watched him rush into his car and pull away. Something was definitely weird, but hey, maybe he just got a new bicycle and had been riding it around for a couple hours and needed to get back to wherever he parked it so he could lock it up before it was stolen. Maybe that's a stretch, but it was the best I could come up with. The rest of the night passed by, and so did several more days. I didn't see him for almost a whole week, which was odd considering he usually came in every night. It wasn't until my Wednesday shift that I saw him again. It was drizzling outside, so the first several hours went by really slow. I was leaning back in my chair and looking out the window at the rain coming down when his red car pulled into the parking lot. As soon as he parked, he got out and rushed inside. I greeted him as he entered, but he ignored me. He hurried through the aisles and was talking under his breath. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but he sounded frustrated, and I got really uncomfortable, like my gut was telling me something was wrong. Then I heard a thud. My eyes shifted to the window, looking at the direction it came from, and the only thing there was Dave's car. It was a loud thud too, like someone kicking the inside of the door. After a second, I looked back at Dave. He wasn't rushing anymore. He was standing in the aisle, staring directly at me, as if I'd just discovered something that I shouldn't have. There was another thud, but my eyes were fixed on Dave as I could feel panic rushing through my body. Then he quickly looked away and hurried out the door. I was still stunned, but managed to get my phone out and snap a picture of his license plate as he drove away. I called the police immediately. That night felt extremely long as I waited for any updates from them, and it wasn't until I got home around 6 a.m. that I received a call from the police. They found the guy from the license plate I gave them, and they found the woman that he had kidnapped. Apparently, he had just moved into a new small cabin on the edge of town less than a week ago, and he had no registered prior address, so they had no way to know what he'd been up to before this incident. Luckily, they saved this woman before she was harmed, though. Also, it turned out Dave wasn't his real name, which isn't surprising, but at least he's locked up for good now. I was 14 when this happened, and this was over spring break. My parents' anniversary happened to be during this week, so they went on a date night a few hours north and were staying in a hotel. Having the house to myself for once, I invited one of my friends, Justin, to stay the night. He brought a ton of snacks and sodas, which we set up on the table in the basement and fired up the PlayStation. We had the speakers out pretty loud, and were gaming down there for 3 hours straight. Eventually though, Justin went upstairs to get a glass of water, and when he came back down, he looked worried. I asked what was up, and he said there was someone outside the house. By the kitchen, we had a large sliding glass door, and I guess he saw a person standing in our backyard. I thought he was trying to play a joke on me, but he was serious. We both went back upstairs and into the kitchen, and at first look, it didn't look like anyone was in the backyard. But then we noticed that there were some smudges on the outside of the door that looked like someone might have been leaning on the glass and looking inside. That's obviously really creepy, so I shut the blinds and we did a quick perimeter check around the other windows. We didn't see anything else, so we figured we were all good. Again, we were both just kids and didn't really know how to handle something like this. After a couple minutes, we went back downstairs and continued where we left off. Another couple hours went by, and it had to be well into the night, like 2 or 3 a.m. Justin was getting tired, so we wrapped up our last match and turned off the PlayStation. The basement had 2 small couches, so we each took one and laid out some blankets, then turned off the lights and called it a night. For some reason, I had trouble falling asleep. Like I would fall asleep for a few minutes and then wake right back up, over and over. I don't know why, possibly from too much caffeine, but it went on for a really long time. It felt like over an hour. But then, one of these times that I woke up, something was different. I opened my eyes. It was pitch black in the whole basement, but there was a tiny streak of light across the other end of the room. I sat up a bit and could tell it was coming from the door above the staircase. I looked over at the other couch, and Justin was still there, sound asleep. Did he get up at some point to get more water? There's no way I wouldn't have noticed. I got up, feeling too uneasy to sleep without making sure this was nothing. I went over to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. The door was cracked open, but not enough to see through. I went to the top and opened it further. The hallway light was on, and so was the kitchen light. It was about then that I remembered about that man that Justin said was standing outside the house, and I walked over to the kitchen to look out the back door. The backyard was empty, and nobody was out there from what I could see. As I was about to look away though, something moved across the reflection on the glass door. I spun around, looking behind me and staring down the hall. Whatever I just saw had quickly moved across the other end of the hallway. I didn't know what to do. I just stood for a second before sprinting back into the basement. I woke up Justin, and after a quick explanation, he was just as terrified as I was. We hid in one of the closets down there and called the police. And while we were waiting, we could hear someone moving around upstairs. It was like they were running around the house, looking for something. It got quiet after a few minutes though, and when police showed up, the person was gone. They found that the small bolt that locked the back door was snapped off, so that's how they got in. Other than that, we don't know anything. For several years after this incident though, every few months we would find those same smudges on the back door of someone clearly looking inside. It wasn't until we finally got a security camera that they left us alone, at least as far as we can tell. It's been over a year since we've seen any signs of them. What they wanted is still unknown. Very interested. A couple days later, I went out and bought a few things, like a small tent and some safety tools, then packed up one of my old backpacks and drove out to a nearby trail. Yes, I was really inexperienced, and going camping alone was not a good idea, but I'd only planned to be out for one night, so I figured even if there was a problem, it wouldn't be so bad. After an hour of driving, I got to the trail. No other cars were parked, and I didn't see any other people. I got out and put on my backpack, then walked to the trailhead. It was thin and not a really well-made path, but was good enough. I don't think it was a popular trail. I just found it by scrolling through a huge list and choosing one that wasn't too long. As I hiked down though, it became more and more clear how little used this trail was. Bushes were overgrown and blocking the way, and even in some portions, the grass had grown in and made it really hard to tell what was the trail and what wasn't. But after an hour, I made it to the end. After seeing the trail, it was about what I'd expected the camping ground to be. It was small and mostly overgrown, but there was something I noticed right away that caught my attention. A pile of logs on the other side of the camping ground. I walked up to it and saw that flakes of charred wood were blowing off in the wind, so it had to have been used recently, maybe even the night before. I looked around again, not seeing any tents or signs of someone being here though. Unsure about it, I went to the other end and put my things down, then got to work on the tent. It wasn't that late yet, so I took my time to make sure the tent was well made. Once I was done, I took a breather, sitting down and chilling for a bit. There was about an hour left of sunlight, and I spent it eating and sitting inside the tent on my sleeping bag. After a while, I could tell the sun was setting, but soon after, a sound came from somewhere nearby. A crackling sound, like from a campfire. I unzipped the opening and stepped out, being immediately faced by a man sitting across the campsite, right next to where the half-burned logs were. He was older than me, probably in his 40s, but there wasn't much else I could see from the little amount of sunlight coming in through the trees. He was already looking at me, so I nervously waved my hand at him. The man waited a few seconds, then lifted his hand as well. I went around to the back of my tent and got a pile of sticks, then made a small campfire. It only took a few minutes before it was mostly dark out. There was only the light from my campfire and the man's campfire on the other side. I kept looking over, trying to see if he had a tent or a backpack or something, but all I could see was him. Every time I looked, I only got more weirded out and uneasy. Where did he even come from? My tent was set up right next to the trail, so I would have heard him walk up, unless he came from the other side, which was just empty woods. I sat out there for at least an hour, probably 2, and never saw the man move from his spot. He just sat by the fire, looking forward. Eventually, I went inside my tent, figuring I had to be overthinking all of this, and the man was probably just another camper. He was at a public camping ground after all. I laid down and tried to rest, but I don't think my mind would let me sleep for some reason, so I just stared at the ceiling and listened to the faint crackling of the man's campfire. I was in there for probably another hour before I heard leaves slowly crunching, making their way toward my tent. I sat up and listened more carefully until I could see the shadow of the man standing on the other side of the fabric. My whole body froze, watching him just stand there for a moment, not moving, not speaking. Then his shadow started moving away as I heard the leaves crunch into the distance. I quickly unzipped the tent and looked out. The campground was empty. The man was gone, having left only the burning logs. I started to pack up, shoving the tent into its holder and even breaking some of the rods just to move faster. I left without ever seeing the man come back. As for what happened out there, or what was going to happen, I really don't know. Not more than a week or two ago, I hiked out on a long trail in the dense woods behind my town. I lived in a really close-knit town with just under 1,000 people, so we were pretty far out from any big populated cities. The woods on the outskirts were very flat, no mountains or hills, but had a few ponds and some small rivers running through the middle. I was heading to one of these rivers. I'd been there before a few times, though I'd never had the chance to camp there until this day. As I could recall from the previous times, I knew it was about a 3-hour walk, almost perfectly north. As I walked between the trees, it was very quiet, aside from birds and other animals rustling the leaves around me. There were no people or hikers, and I didn't plan to see anyone because this was not even a trail, it was just open woods. But as I was just 45 minutes out from the river, I ran into someone. We were both walking toward each other, and it seemed like neither of us had noticed the other until we were just a few feet away, separated by only a couple trees. I know I had a confused and almost nervous look, finding it really unusual to run into someone off trail in the middle of these woods, but the man had the same look. I was about to break the silence and say hello, but after a second, his face shifted into a slight nervous smile and he turned to walk off to the side. I followed his lead and kept on walking as well, but I looked back once I got a little further away and saw the man was no longer walking, but almost running away. Not saying a word when running into each other gave me a somewhat unsettled feeling, but seeing him run off like that only made it even stranger. It was like the man did not want to be seen, or he didn't care about the almost impossible chance that we had run into each other. Whatever the case, I kept minding my own business and made my way to the river. This was no campsite or anything, so I just plopped my bag and tent down on the flattest area I could find. Then I got a fire going, since the sun was just about to set. I tossed in a bunch of random sticks and twigs that were around and made sure it would burn for a couple hours at least. I was hoping to stay up and wait until the stars came out so I could do some stargazing. Away from town, I can often get a good view of the Milky Way, which is a sight I never want to miss out on. Hours passed while I was sitting and waiting, until a distinct sound came through the quiet woods behind me. Footsteps, slow and careful ones. I turned and looked, not seeing much in the dark. As I gazed around though, the footsteps stopped, telling me that while I may not see them, they can see me. I reached down for my bag and picked up a heavy-duty flashlight, shining it at the trees. I could see decently far now, but as I moved it back and forth, I didn't see anyone. I felt my heart rate increasing a bit as the unsettling feeling came over me again. Anyone out there? I tried again. Hello? Not even the sound of another footstep. After a moment of contemplation, I started to walk toward where I'd heard the sound from. I thought maybe there was a chance I was mistaken, but I needed to be sure. I carefully stepped through the woods, keeping the flashlight steadily pointing ahead, until I got to where I thought the sound was from, and moved the light to my left, looking behind each tree, until the light suddenly revealed a large man. It was the one I'd run into only a few hours ago. He was no more than 20 feet away, but even with the light on him, he stood still. In an act of quick thinking, I tried to not react and continued to move my flashlight across the woods, hoping he would think that I somehow didn't see him. Then I began walking back to the tent, trying to act as unbothered as possible. I picked up my bag and looked around once more, before quickly leaving my tent and campfire behind and walking into the woods along the riverside. Once I felt I'd made enough distance, I sprinted as far as I could until I was without a doubt away from that man. I found a spot to rest at and sat there awake until sunrise. I don't think I was followed, as I was able to make it out without ever hearing or seeing that man again. I'm not sure why he was out there, or why he had shown up and hid by my campsite, but I never went back to retrieve my tent, in fear that I might find out. I'm a manager at a mid-sized grocery store. I do 10-hour shifts and work mostly overnights. At the time, our store was having some staff issues that made pretty much every department understaffed and overworked, and overnight stocking was no exception. I had one guy that would help me 5 nights a week, but that was it, other than me. This was on his day off, so it was only me working. I got in at 10 and was alone by 10:15. After running some numbers in the office, I started pulling out loads of boxes to the aisles to start unpacking and stocking. Even though I had no help this night, I still had to get everything done, so I was working hard and as quickly as I could. I didn't even stop for a break or anything. But suddenly a tapping sound echoed through the store. I stopped and listened, hearing it happen again, and it sounded just like someone tapping on a window at the front of the store. I looked at my watch for the first time since I started working, and it was 2 a.m. Time had flown by, but there was no reason anyone should be here. I walked down the aisle and to the front, where I quickly saw someone outside the store. He was leaning against the window and trying to look inside. He spotted me as I walked up and stared at me. When I was just on the other side, I asked what he wanted. The man, looking like he was homeless, told me to open the door. He had a straight face, no smile or anything. I said we were closed and he couldn't be here, then turned to walk away, but the man immediately banged on the window. Not tapping like he was before. This was now harsh banging. I looked back at him, and he was clearly enraged, with his fist against the glass. Thinking this guy was crazy, I told him I'd call the cops if he doesn't leave, then started pulling my phone out to show I was serious. And only then did he step away from the window. He still had that angry look as he walked away and into the parking lot. Seeing him leave, I put my phone away and got back to work. We get a lot of crazy customers around here, so I didn't think on it too much. And again, I had to focus on getting my work done. I was only able to get a small cart of boxes stocked, so it was maybe 15 minutes later when a sudden sound echoed through the store. It sounded like something metal snapping or scraping. I quickly dropped what I was doing and ran up to the front. Nobody was at the windows, so I went up to the entrance door. It was one of those revolving glass doors, which uses a bolt lock on the top to keep it from opening when we close the store for the night. Right away, I saw that bolt was missing. Like not even just unlocked. The entire bolt was gone. I pressed my hand on the door and it glided around, completely allowing anyone to get in. I could feel my face turn white as I realized what this meant, and I knew I needed to call the police immediately. I turned around to go to the front office, but was instantly looking into the face of that guy from before. He was only a few feet from me, still having that enraged stare. I didn't hesitate to run out the revolving door, hearing the guy follow close behind me. As I ran out into the parking lot, an old van came speeding up to the front. It nearly hit me, but I just kept running until I got to my car. When I rushed in, I noticed the guy wasn't chasing me anymore, and the van was now speeding out of the parking lot. I called the cops and spent the next couple hours explaining what happened. It wasn't until the next day that we got security footage of the man breaking inside, but it wasn't the best image quality. We can say almost for sure that they were trying to get me into their van, but we have no way to know why. I'm sure if I'd not been as quick though, I probably wouldn't have ever been seen again. This happened several years ago, in early October. I had 2 weeks off work and had taken a trip down to a cabin in the hills outside of my city. It was an Airbnb that was far out, which was perfect because I wanted to spend a few days camping as well. I drove 2 hours to the cabin and got there in the afternoon. It was really nice and quiet. No other cabins or buildings were in sight. It was just the woods going all around. I set my things inside and looked through the rooms, but it was nothing special. They had a very cozy, old-fashioned feel to it. Not something I was a huge fan of, but it was a nice change of environment for a vacation. The rest of that night and the following few days went by with nothing of interest. I spent my time relaxing, sitting outside in the cold fall weather for most of the days, and spending the nights inside by the fireplace. It was on the 5th day, though, that I set out with my camping gear. I wasn't sure how long exactly I was going to camp for, but planned for 2 to 3 nights. There were a couple trails nearby that I was aware of from planning ahead, but only one of them actually connected to the cabin. To keep things simple, I chose to just take that one so I could leave straight from the cabin and not have to drive anywhere. I walked for at least 3 or 4 hours before I found the spot I was happy with. This was the only clearing I'd found, aside from the trail itself, but something would just feel uncomfortable about camping directly on the path. It was closing in on nighttime already, so I got my tent up and started a fire. As it got darker, I put on my heavy sweater and jacket, with the cold really starting to come in. I sat out by the fire for an hour, eating up a quick meal and waiting for myself to get more sleepy. But at some point, while I was sitting there, my eyes caught sight of something. A figure walking out in the woods. I watched as they walked through the dark, no flashlight or anything, and disappeared in the distance. The only light in the woods was my campfire, aside from the dim moonlight, so whoever was out there had to have seen me. It was so strange the way they were walking though, just being out here in the woods with no light and not even following the trail. It made me feel really unnerved, enough to think about taking the long walk back to the cabin, but I knew it wasn't safe to go out this late into the night. I stayed on watch for a half hour, checking everywhere, but not seeing any more signs of the person. After a while, I started getting tired, so I flattened the fire and let it burn out. But just as the glow faded into ashes, I heard footsteps coming from the left of the campsite. My eyes widened, looking into the woods and trying to force my eyes to adjust to the dark, but all I could see was a few feet ahead. The footsteps got louder, coming toward the campsite, getting close enough for me to think that they had to be just outside of my sight. But then they walked slightly off, staying in the dark and passing by, then continuing to walk away. They never stopped or did anything to show that they acknowledged that I was there, but the chances of them being out here at the exact place I was just impossible to be a coincidence. Once the footsteps were gone, I took out my flashlight and disassembled my tent, packing my things and going back to the trail. It wasn't ideal, but I could sense that something was off about whatever was going on. I walked quickly, keeping my flashlight on the trail and trying to keep myself calm. The woods were so quiet though, just adding to the eeriness of the situation I'd found myself in. Although I had my doubts, I made it back to the cabin. It was still well into the night, and after walking so much that day, on no sleep, I passed out on the couch just minutes after getting inside. My mind was so foggy, I wasn't even really thinking about the person in the woods anymore. Being a 4-hour walk from where I'd seen them, I didn't feel I really had reason to be scared anymore. As I was passed out though, I groggily woke up to a strange sound. Something on the other side of the cabin, like wood scraping against the walls. My eyes shot open and I whipped my head around to face the back of the room, seeing the window slowly being pushed open by a man outside. His eyes immediately shifted onto me as I stood up. Then he dropped the window and ran away. By the time I gotten over, he was well into the cover of the woods. I got everything together and left the cabin, driving to a hotel in a nearby town. Obviously, I don't know who that man was, or what he was doing out there. Clearly, he'd followed me though, and tried to get inside the cabin while I was sleeping. If he had, there's no saying what would have happened. My name is Caleb Fletcher. I'm 16 years old, and this took place around 8 to 9 months ago, on the 24th of August, which was a Saturday. School had been going on for about 2 weeks, so to de-stress a little, I decided to see if my friends, well called Griffin and Broly, wanted to hop on Fortnite. My mom and sister were out shopping, my dad was working, and I was bored. It was around 8 p.m. when we finally got on to play, because I had decided to make pizza rolls beforehand and ended up burning the batch. After a few rounds, I could tell my friends were getting tired of losing, so they got off after only an hour. I planned on just lying down with my phone and going to bed. That wasn't until I heard my 2 dogs barking outside. It's not unusual for them to bark, given how people typically walk on the side of the road, but I still looked anyway, just to make sure. I didn't see anybody, but seconds after looking out the window, I heard our garage door open and shut. That usually means my dad is home from work, but I didn't see his van outside, and he had texted me earlier, telling me that he would be working late tonight. I decided to walk downstairs into the dining room and look out the window to get a better view. From there, I could see that our driveway was empty. There wasn't a person or vehicle in sight. I wasn't the type to go investigate, so I ran back up to my bedroom and texted my family group chat to ask if anybody was home. I told my mom about the garage door, and she told me to turn off the lights, lock my bedroom, and stay there until she got home. So I did just that. About 15 minutes later, I thought I heard our wooden floor downstairs creaking, like someone was trying to be sneaky. I didn't have anything to use as a weapon, so I unclipped my microphone's boom arm from my desk and quietly opened the door. I walked out onto our upstairs balcony and looked over, trying to see if I could spot anyone hiding or anything suspicious. I stupidly yelled, "Is anybody there?" like they were really going to answer. I thought everything was fine though, until I saw a large silhouette of someone standing underneath the balcony. I panicked and ran to the closest room with a door, which happened to be my small bathroom. The intruder must have known I noticed them, because I heard loud and fast footsteps running up our stairs as I locked myself in the bathroom. I had stupidly left my phone in the bedroom, which was the room right next to me. After I built up enough courage, I bolted into my bedroom, locking the door as soon as I got in. My sister's room was right across from mine, and its door was open, so I figured the intruder must have been in there. After locking my bedroom door, I grabbed my phone and typed 911 into it. Just before I called, I noticed that the storage room in my wall was open just a tad. I saw a dark brown eye peeking through the crevice, staring into my soul. The pure terror I felt in that moment is something I'll never forget. I booked it down the stairs and out my front door, running up the hill to my neighbor's house. He was a police officer. He alerted the other cops while I stayed with his wife, and he went down to investigate. I told him exactly where the intruder was, hiding in my bedroom. Minutes later, I ran back down the hill to see if the intruder had been caught. When I walked in, I saw a tall, skinny man with a gray beard and a dirty black coat being pushed onto the floor by my neighbor as he was getting handcuffed. I'm not allowed to be home alone anymore, and we have better security around our house now. My family was just happy to know I wasn't hurt, and they were thankful for my neighbor's bravery. I don't wish an experience like this on anybody, not even my worst enemy. It was a couple days before Halloween. I actually had the next few days off, so after I got off work, I was looking forward to staying up late and enjoying the night. I picked up some fast food on the way home, eating on the couch while watching some Netflix. About 30 minutes into the show, I paused it and got up to throw out the rest of the food that I hadn't finished. I walked into the kitchen and tossed it, but when I turned around, I saw someone standing in my backyard. They were just looking at my house, not really doing anything else. For context, my backyard was small but fenced in, so there was no way he just stumbled through while taking a shortcut or something. I flipped on the back porch light and slid the door open. "Hey, what are you doing?" I yelled at them. With the porch light now on, I could see their face. They were young, probably in their 20s, but had really tired, and for lack of a better word, creepy eyes. They didn't respond to me, so I called out again. "You need to leave. This is my property." The guy looked over at me, then casually started walking toward the gate. I made sure they left, going to my front window and watched them walk down the street. Once he had left, I just took a moment to think about what was going on. It was such an odd thing. Why was he even standing in my backyard to begin with? He was just staring at my house for seemingly no reason. I even went as far as to go out into my backyard and stand in the same place he was, looking up at my house to see what he could have been looking at, but there really wasn't anything. I went back inside and tried to forget it. I didn't really know what else to do. I poured myself a drink and sat back down, playing the show. I'd finished the episode and just started the next one, so maybe 20 minutes had gone by before I heard a few subtle footsteps running in my backyard, followed by a thud against my house. I stood up and ran to the kitchen, seeing that same guy now against my back door. He was pushing his body against it and aggressively trying to pull it open. I grabbed the handle just in case he somehow got through the lock, but seeing the rage in his eyes close up was horrifying. I backed away and got my phone, calling the police as I stood in the kitchen and watched this guy continue trying to get in. But then, he just stopped. He stared at me through the glass door, breathing heavily and still having that crazed look in his eyes. Then he walked back to the gate, but this time he didn't walk away. He stayed somewhere on the side of the house, like he was hiding. I constantly went back and forth from all the windows, waiting for the police to arrive and hoping the guy didn't try anything else. 5 minutes went by with no sounds or movement before a police car showed up. Right away, I heard footsteps running from the side of the house, but not away from the house. They ran back up to the door, trying to force it open again. They chose to attempt breaking in again, rather than taking their chances running away. Obviously, police were able to get him in the act, and after a quick struggle, they got him cuffed and into the car. When questioned, it was very apparent that the guy was under the influence of something heavy, and it was later confirmed with some tests. Despite questioning him that night, and in the following days when he was sober, the man never gave actual reasons for his actions. I'm unsure how to feel about it. Part of me sees it as just some crazy guy that had no reason, so why worry about it? But then a part of me thinks of the look in his eyes, and the fact that he tried to break in, over running away, means he had to have had a reason. And either way, if he had gotten in, what he would have tried to do to me is likely just as horrifying, reason or not. As far as I know, he was only imprisoned for a few weeks due to not being sober during his actions. So I'm left to just worry about whether or not he intends on coming back.